The forest was thirsty, parched. Months without rain had turned the once vibrant ecosystem into a shadow of its former self. The air, usually thick with the smell of pine needles and damp earth, was now heavy, silent and dry. The forest floor, once springy underfoot, crunched with every step. It was as if the very life was being sucked out of the woods. The trees, once proud and towering, were now skeletal figures against the relentless sun. Their leaves, once a vibrant canopy of green, were now brittle and brown, clinging desperately to their branches. The streams and creeks, usually brimming with life, were reduced to dusty scars on the landscape. The forest was holding its breath, waiting, praying for rain. The drought was more than just a dry spell, it was a creeping disaster. It affected everything. The animals were more skittish, their usual playful nature replaced with a constant search for water. Birdsong, once a constant symphony, was now reduced to the occasional, desperate chirp. The silence was eerie, a constant reminder of the forest's plight. This was a forest primed for disaster, a tinderbox waiting for a spark. The forest floor was a mosaic of death. Fallen leaves, branches and entire trees lay scattered like discarded bones. Years of accumulated debris, normally damp and decomposing, were now tinder dry. It was the perfect fuel. A single spark could ignite an inferno. The danger was evident in the way the dry leaves crackled underfoot. It was a sound that sent shivers down your spine. Each step felt like a gamble, a roll of the dice against an unseen enemy. The forest was a powder keg. The lack of moisture meant that any fire would spread rapidly. There would be no natural barriers, no damp ground to slow the flames. It would be a race against time, a desperate fight for survival. The forest was holding its breath, and so were we. Unbeknownst to the forest, another threat loomed. A silent, invisible menace, nano dust, a byproduct of a nearby industrial accident. The dust was composed of microscopic particles, each one highly flammable. It was an accident waiting to happen. The dust had been contained, or so they thought, but the wind, that fickle mistress, had other plans. It carried the nanodust, unseen for miles, depositing it on the unsuspecting forest. It was a silent invasion, a stealthy coating of danger. The nanodust settled on the dry leaves, the brittle branches, the parched trees. It was an insidious threat, invisible to the naked eye, yet capable of unimaginable destruction. The forest, already on edge, had just been handed a death sentence. A thick fog rolled in, blanketing the forest in an eerie silence. It was a fog unlike any other, heavy and strangely oily. What seemed like a blessing, a hint of much-needed moisture, was actually a curse in disguise. The fog was laden with the microscopic particles of nanodust. The tiny particles clung to everything they touched. The trees, the undergrowth, even the air itself seemed thicker, heavier. It was as if the fog was suffocating the forest. The nanodust, invisible to the naked eye, was now everywhere. The air, usually fresh and invigorating, was now heavy with the metallic tang of the dust. It was an unsettling smell, alien and dangerous. It spoke of technology gone wrong, of unintended consequences. The forest, already vulnerable, was now a sitting duck. The fog lingered for days, draping the forest in its deadly shroud. When it finally lifted, it left behind a silent threat, a layer of flammable dust, just waiting for a spark. Section 5, Spark of Calamity. It started with a flicker, a carelessly discarded cigarette perhaps, or a spark from a passing vehicle. Whatever the source, the result was the same. The dry leaves ignited with terrifying speed. The fire, small at first, quickly grew, fueled by the dry tinder of the forest floor. The flames, hungry and relentless, raced through the undergrowth, licking at the dry bark of the trees. The air, already hot and dry, became thick with smoke, making it difficult to breathe. The fire crackled and roared, its hunger insatiable. It was a scene of terrifying beauty. The flames danced and swirled, casting an eerie orange glow on the surrounding trees. But the beauty was deceptive. This was no controlled burn, no natural part of the forest's cycle. This was an inferno in the making. The forest, so long parched and vulnerable, was now at the mercy of the flames. Section 6. The Inferno Unleashed. The wind picked up, whipping the flames into a frenzy. The fire, now a raging monster, roared through the forest, consuming everything in its path. Trees exploded as the sap within them boiled, sending burning embers high into the air. These embers, carried by the wind, became airborne incendiaries, starting new fires far ahead of the main front. But there was something else, something insidious, fueling the fire's terrifying speed and intensity: the nanodust. As the fire raged, it ignited the microscopic particles, turning the air itself into fuel. The fire wasn't just spreading, it was exploding. The firestorm raged for what seemed like an eternity, a terrifying display of nature's fury amplified by human negligence. The flames danced and swirled, driven by the wind and fueled by the dust. The forest, once a sanctuary, was now a vision of hell. Section 7. Battling the Beast. Firefighters, their faces grim under a sky choked with smoke, battled the blaze with a mixture of courage and desperation. Their efforts, though heroic, seemed almost futile against the inferno. Water, usually the firefighters' greatest weapon, seemed to evaporate in the intense heat before it could even reach the flames. The fire moved with terrifying speed, outrunning containment lines and outmaneuvering even the most experienced fire crews. The heat was unbearable, the air thick with smoke and the constant roar of the fire. The nanodust added another layer of danger. The firefighters, their faces covered with masks, could only watch in horror as the fire jumped from one area to another, seemingly defying the laws of physics. Section 8. The Dust Inferno. The real horror began when the fire reached a particularly dense pocket of nanodust. The result was an explosion, a blinding flash of heat and light that shook the very ground. Trees vaporized, the air itself seemed to ignite, and a shockwave radiated outwards, knocking firefighters off their feet. It was a scene straight out of a nightmare. The firefighters caught in the blast were lucky to escape with their lives. The explosion created a firestorm, a vortex of flames and superheated air that sucked the oxygen from the surrounding forest, leaving a trail of smoldering devastation in its wake. The nanodust, once a silent threat, had revealed its true nature. It was a force multiplier, a catalyst for destruction on a scale never before imagined. Section 9. A lesson in ashes. The fire, finally subdued after days of relentless effort, left behind a scene of utter desolation. The once vibrant forest was now a charred wasteland, a stark reminder of the devastating power of nature amplified by human negligence. The air, thick with the acrid smell of smoke, carried a sense of loss and regret. The nanodust fire was a wake-up call, a stark reminder of the hidden dangers of our technological advancements. It highlighted the importance of responsible forest management, of being vigilant about fire safety in a changing climate. But most importantly, it underlined the need for greater security and control over potentially hazardous nanomaterials. The dust, a byproduct of our quest for progress, had shown its dark side. It was a lesson learned in the ashes of a forest, a lesson we could not afford to ignore.